Hello, everyone. Welcome to Groundwater Talk Live. I'm Tom Ballard, the Groundwater Guy, and something a little bit different today. We're going to talk about process management plans. So this is a little different. Typically for water utilities, we talk about asset management plans. So basically, a process management plan is basically like an asset management plan, except for processes rather than specific assets. So it's really not a concept that is really, become very popular for amongst water utilities, but I think it's something that's really important because it's just as every bit as critical as the assets themselves. So let's dive in and kind of look at what process management plans are and how we implement them in the water utility. So a process management plan, really, it's a structured document that outlines how critical processes will be managed. And this is important. It's critical processes. You really need to start with the critical processes. So just like you look at the criticality of assets in an asset management plan, you're looking at critical processes here that are going to allow your water utility to operate effectively. So the critical processes will be managed, monitored, and improved over time. It should integrate elements of the asset management plan so they work together to ensure the utility's infrastructure and resources are used efficiently. So if you get this down, it's really going to make you a lot more efficient. We tie in best management practices, or SOPs as some people call them, into this as well. And ultimately, it's going to, if you implement a process management plan, it's going to save you a lot of time and energy, and you're going to be able to train your people more effectively and share that knowledge. So it really is an important instrument to really consider implementing in your water utility. And this works just fine for we here focus really on water utilities that have less than 3,000 connections. Works just fine for that, and so we can talk about that as well. So why do we want to do this? Is to ensure efficient, reliable, compliant operations despite resource constraints. And we all know that small water utilities are both resource constrained, both in terms of funding and in terms of staff. So this helps you allows you basically to make use of the most efficient use of your staff and your limited resources. And I want and I should say that not only is it compliant, but it makes you more efficient as well. And so squeezing every hour out of your day and making that more efficient. So this is important. So let's dive in. What are our objectives when we're putting together a process management plan? So we want to ensure safe and reliable water service. Obviously, that's number one in the whole operation. We want to optimize our resource allocation. So financial, human, and physical assets want to be optimized in our processes. So we want to look at that. We want to maintain regulatory compliance, of course, and keep things flowing smoothly. The operational management plan will allow us to do that. Process management plan will allow us to do that. And we want to minimize risks and improve resilience over time as we operate this. So number one step is really to sit down and identify your critical processes. This is number one. For a small water utility with limited financial and staff resources, focusing on the most critical processes, and that's where you start. We don't want to try to document every process right now. You really got to identify what are your most critical processes and focus your time on getting those down, because if you take your critical processes that really allow you to function properly and get those down, work the bugs out of that, and lay it out all on paper or on the computer, then you're going to maximize your time and effort. And then you can go back and document some of those less important processes if you want to. But really, the prime goal initially is to document the most critical processes. And to do that, you need to identify what they are. So So what are your critical processes that are essential to ensure reliable service, regulatory compliance, and financial sustainability? So we start by identifying and listing the most critical processes. So what are those that and here's an example list for you. Your critical process. You may break them down a little bit differently. You may vary a little bit, but these are some examples that I'm just putting up there to give you some ideas. Obviously, number one is water quality management. We can probably break that down into more critical processes, a number of processes, but like I say, this just gives you an idea on how we're breaking this out and identifying these critical processes. Leak detection, water loss control. Number three, infrastructure maintenance and repair. Number four, customer billing and revenue collection, because that's important. We can't run our water utility without having that revenue come in. Emergency preparedness and response. There's a very set procedure you got to follow there, so it's important to document that. That is a critical process. Regulatory compliance and reporting, that kind of goes with the water quality, but it can be different too. Source water protection, staff training and development, public communication and customer service, financial management, and grant writing. So this is just a list of 10 potentially critical processes. Your mileage may vary, so your processes may be a little different. You may break them down a little bit different. The important thing is to identify the critical processes and start getting them down on paper. And this is where we start, listing them, identifying what are your critical processes that are specific to your water utility. All right, so the first thing we want to do once we've identified those critical processes is process ownership and responsibilities. All these processes need to have an owner. And so you want to assign ownership of each critical process to specific staff members, or you can do it to a team as well, but they have to be responsible for maintaining this process, documenting it, and making sure it flows smoothly. So we need to define roles and responsibilities for each process. Now, that's where your SOP or your best management practice is going to come in, because you're going to define those roles and exactly what goes into this. We'll talk a little bit about flow charting these things too, and how you get all that documented, because you really it's going to be a little bit of an iterative process to get this down on paper and see where you can improve the process, where you can make it more efficient, and really documenting that to make sure everything is running smoothly. So the next part of it is process documentation. And this is where the standard operating procedures or best management practices come in. You want to develop a detailed documentation for each critical process. You need to include the purpose of the process, key steps and workflows, required resources such as staff, tools, budget. You want to identify the performance metrics and targets. How do you know if this process is working properly? And we want to create flow charts for each process to visually represent workflows. Now, these aren't going to be really complicated flow charts, but it's amazing that creating a picture and doing a simple flow chart can really help you identify how you can improve these processes for your water utility. So creating a simple flow chart of each process will be part of that process, and then we roll this all together into an SOP or BMP, however you want to term it. I use those terms pretty much interchangeably. I think there may be some people may use them a little bit differently, but I think they're basically the same as the standard operating procedure where you've documented that particular process down on paper, and then we have a flow chart that's going to go with it. We'll talk about flow charting here in just a minute. All right. Integration with your asset management plan. You need to link your processes to the utility's asset management plan. So we want to identify assets involved in each process. So the pipes, the pumps, the meters, the treatment systems, whatever. that goes into your asset management plan, that those that are involved in this particular process need to be identified and integrated there, because criticality of assets versus criticality of the specific process, they're going to work together. So we need to prioritize the asset maintenance and replacement based on criticality and risk, both of the asset itself and the process. Because if you got a process that depends on a critical asset, then the criticality affects both that asset and the process itself. So if that critical asset fails, then the process is going to fail as well. So you can start to see how the asset management plan works together with the process management plan as well. So we use asset condition data to inform process improvements as well. So they work together. Integration with asset management. Here's just an example. If you had a process management, if you had a process that involved leak detection and water loss control, then you include a step to update the asset inventory with repaired or replaced pipes, so we know that process is going to flow smoothly, because those are going to be those assets are going to be a key part of the process. Excuse me. All right. Flowchart development. This is going to be really important, because most people find it's really much easier to look at a picture than a bunch of words on paper. So developing a flowchart for each critical process to visualize the workflows and decision points is going to be very important, because you're going to be able to refer to that at a glance, and it's really going to help you refine that process too, because we may have some inefficiencies in our processes that by putting it down in a flow chart, we can work those bugs out of that process and make it run more smoothly, and once again improving your efficiency and your staff's time. We're all critical of time, or critically short of time, and people are running everywhere. If you can improve that process to make it more efficient, then you're going to be able to spend time on other things as well. So we like to use pretty much a simple flow chart. It's a standard flow chart symbols, so we're connecting them together with arrows. So we're using ovals for the start and the end, and rectangles for each step. So we name the step, we number it, and then we connect it together with arrows. And then when you get to a decision point, that's going to be a diamond on there, because you can have yes or no, and it may branch off and go a different direction depending on what your answer is at that particular point. So very simple flow chart. You've probably seen them with all kinds of different weird symbols and all that stuff. We really, for our flow charts for these critical processes, we only need 3 symbols: an oval, a rectangle, and a diamond. All right. Here's an example of flowchart development for say a water quality management program. So one is we schedule water quality testing, collect samples from designated locations, transport the samples to the lab, analyze the sample for our particular contaminants, and then we run into a decision. So this would be the diamond symbol. Are the results within regulatory limits? If yes, then we document results and report to the regulators. If no, then we go on a different branch. We initiate corrective actions and notify the public. Just treatment, notify the public, and then we get to the end and we update the records and prepare the next testing cycle. So this is a very simple flow chart here. You probably have more steps in this, but this is simplified for this video. What that looks like then in a flow chart, and I realize this is kind of small, but you can kind of see the different steps there. We get down to the diamond, we have a yes and a no, and it branches out, and then we come back to the end. So this is an example example of a fairly simple flow chart for water quality testing, and just so you get the idea and a little bit of a visual on that. And we can see if we go back here, here's our steps that are written down. So this would be something that would be written down in the SOP, and then so you read that and you look at that and you try to understand that. Doing it in a chart, in a flow chart, much easier to see and try to pick out the problems with this process and how you can improve it and what we may need to add. So you can see, I always find a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that really is true in this case. So flow charts can really help in your process management plan. All right, so next up is performance monitoring and improvement. We want to define our key performance indicators, KPIs, for each process. So an example of that would be customer billing and revenue collection. We'd want to track the percent of bills collected on time. So the percentage of invoices, you send them out a water invoice, what percentage of people are paying those on time. So we can track that over time. That is a KPI or key performance indicator for that particular process. So we want to establish a schedule for reviewing the process performance. So if we're a little bit out of whack on our KPIs and not performing well, now we're going to go back and look at these things on a quarterly basis and see where we can tweak the process to maybe get our KPIs performing adequately. So now we got that flow chart laid out. We can go back and say, what do we need to do do we need to bill a little bit earlier? What do we need to do to make this happen? So that's where that flow chart works together in evaluating our KPIs. So, and lastly, identify opportunities for improvement and document the lessons learned. It's going to be a continuous improvement process is really what goes on here. Is we're constantly looking at things and improving things. If you got a picture of it in a process, then you can go back and you can focus on those areas you need improvement. All right, risk management. So we want to identify the risks associated with each process. So equipment failure, staff shortages, regulatory changes, those types of risks that may affect our processes. And we want to develop mitigation strategies for high priority risks. So once again, criticality or high risks is a way of looking at these things. And so that feeds back into our process too, because if we have processes that have a little bit more risk at certain steps, really got to look at that and refine that process so we're mitigating or accommodating that risk in there. So an example is for emergency preparedness, we'd maintain a list of backup suppliers for critical parts, for instance. So that you can build into your process to always maintain at least quarterly an updated list of critical parts suppliers for critical equipment to make sure that process is flowing smoothly. Resource allocation and budgeting. Allocating resource, staff, budget, tools to support critical processes. So we want to prioritize our funding for high impact processes, so water quality, leak detection, things like that, and make sure that we're providing the assets and funding those assets to keep that particular critical process working smoothly. So seeking grants and partnerships to supplement limited resources. And this actually, I said this works with our asset management plan. It also works with our capital improvement plan, because here we're looking at critical processes tied back to critical assets, which ties back to our funding. So it all works together. You can kind of see how it all comes together, but it kind of feeds into the processes that keep everything running. All right. training and capacity building, develop a training program to ensure staff are competent in executing critical processes, include cross-training to address staff shortages. So you want to make sure that everybody is cross-trained as much as possible on things. And, this goes back to our SOPs and the knowledge retention part of that is going to allow people to quickly pick things up. If they've been cross-trained, they may still need a little refresher. So having those SOPs and flowcharts there on how the processes work is going to be pretty important to if we got a staff shortage or somebody's retired or quit, then have the other staff jump in and be able to pick things up pretty quickly. All right. Communication and stakeholder engagement. We want to communicate the process management plan to staff, customers, and regulators so they know what our processes are and what we're doing to improve them and get their buy-in and feedback as well. We want to engage stakeholders in the process of improvements. So, for instance, customer feedback on billing, what makes it easier for them to pay. All right. And then lastly, continuous improvement. We want to regularly review and update the process management plan to reflect changes in regulations, technology, or utility needs, or even just getting feedback on things and customer input, and even finding out through your own work what works maybe a little bit better and how we can tweak that process as we go along. So that's the process, continuous improvement. We don't want to just throw it on the shelf and forget about it. We want to improve it so it works as efficiently as possible. All right, conclusions. The process management plan should be a living document that evolves with the utility's needs. Things are going to change. Technology is going to change. We're even seeing now the incorporation of AI into a lot of processes and functionality. So your process management plan is going to have to change and be a living document to take into account all these changes that help us stay on top of our efficiency game. By integrating critical processes with asset management and using the flowcharts to visualize the workflows, the utility can operate more efficiently, reduce risks, and ensure long-term sustainability. So we're constantly looking at these things, and we got a good visual on what's going on in our water system. And lastly, regularly review and update the process management plan to reflect changing conditions and incorporate any lessons learned. Sometimes we learn things the hard way, but if we take that and we improve our process, then maybe that's not so bad as long as it doesn't do too much damage while you're learning things the hard way. So, all right, so that is the process management plan in a nutshell, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in some coming videos, especially maybe a little bit more on the flow charting part of things. But you can kind of see how that all works together in your utility to make sure that things are flowing efficiently as possible. So we'll talk about that more. If you have any questions, you can always get a hold of me. I'm happy to chat with you about this. We do have coming up, we have our Water Masters program. This is a 12-month management program for small water systems of less than 3,000 connections. We really focus on that here because they're the ones that need the most help. We try to make this as efficient as possible, and it really covers management, things like the process management plan, asset management plan, capital improvement, TMF requirements. A lot of that stuff is what gets covered in here, and even things like cyber security. So if you're interested in knowing more about that plan, we basically 6 to 8 people per mastermind is really what it involves. You can get a hold of me. My email is here, tballard@scehydrogeology.com. And thank you very much for the show. We will see you again next week.